Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast. We have an excellent episode today. Jason Hennessey is with me today. Jason, super happy to have you.
Todd Tasky, man, thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is interesting because last week, Raj Ramanian, the CEO of Herringbone, was on, talked about working with private equity, talked about putting pieces together, talked about, from his perspective, the acquisition of Hennessey. And so now we get to see it from the other side, which I always think is wonderful. So for anybody listening, you can go, it's just the episode before here, and you can listen to Raj talk about that. Just before we jump in, Jason, I don't know if you are, I want to say thanks to our sponsor. So I don't know if you're aware of the good people at Fiscal Advocate, John Morris's group. Great group. Fiscal Advocate helps agency owners organize their financial data in a dashboard so that they can harness that data and use it well to make decisions and on and on. And John's a friend of the show. He's been on a time or two, and Fiscal Advocate is a great sponsor. So happy to have them. With that said, let's jump in. Tell me, if you will, please, introduction. Jason Hennessey, tell me about Hennessey, what you do and who you do it for.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'm Jason Hennessey, the CEO, founder of Hennessey Digital. Digital marketing agency with a primary specialty, I guess, if you will, in the legal vertical. Agency just celebrated 10 years. I got my start into the digital marketing world way back in 2001. So most of my adult life. But over the past 10 years, it's just been very exciting to kind of build, a pretty recognizable brand in the legal vertical.
And can I, before we get into some of the other stuff, it is a recognizable brand in legal. It is larger than most, with great clients, probably better retention, better economics than most. What do you think is the underlying cause for that?
I think there's a lot, it obviously has a lot to do with the people that we employ at Hennessey Digital, and so I always live that motto that if you take care of your employees will take care of your clients. And so we've got a great culture that we've built. I've personally been doing SEO in even more competitive spaces than legal, which is very competitive, years and years and years before I started Hennessey. And so when I entered the legal vertical, a lot of the strategies that I used to deploy in other verticals, worked in legal. And so we were able to get some amazing results. And I always like to say, SEO is the easy part. Scaling SEO is the hard part. And we figured out a way to scale the agency and lead with integrity and, not lie to clients or mismanage expectations. Like if a client didn't have the right budget, we would just tell them, best of luck, we're here to support you. But it's probably not going to be a right fit because we won't be able to make that work with the budget that you have, right? Whereas a lot of agencies will just say yes, 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 mismanage expectations, their reputations then get tarnished. And so I think that's just been a big part of what we've built over the years.
And Raj and I spoke about this, about working with Trinity Hunt and the quality of firm that it is and on and on. And I'd like to get your comments on that, but I'm curious how you personally thought of private equity, if you had any relationship with private equity, if you were never going to do it or always wanted to do it. Did you have any preconceived notions kind of before you went into this?
I mean, not really. I mean, for the first 9 years of business, we were focused on just kind of building a good business, right? And building a good brand. And then, through that journey, there was definitely years where, our margins were as low as like 7%, 9%, right? While we were in hyper growth mode, right? And so Last year was the first year that we really focused on kind of profitability and getting our EBITDA up. And the thought process was, we would try to grow the EBITDA over the next 3 years, bring it to like 2027, and then potentially look for a capital partner to either acquire or invest in Hennessey Digital. And so Trinity Hunt, aka private equity, came a bit earlier. And when you're in the process of potentially looking at some type of an exit, over 3 years, you start to take those meetings early. At least that's the right approach. You start building relationships, and we met with a few other, groups before this. And we built relationships with them. And so we were just having a regular meeting with this group, and the meeting got more serious. We bought into their thesis and their portfolio and what they're building. And so, things kind of shaped up, and we ended up kind of, doing the deal 2 years earlier, I guess.
So that's very interesting. What about Trinity Hunt kind of shifted your thinking a little bit? And how important is it to have multiple data points to compare and contrast against? Or said the other way, if you would have met Trinity Hunt first, do you think you would have recognized them for what they were?
Good question. I think it all comes down to timing, right? Timing is important, right? Because we were meeting with other groups, where our EBITDA wasn't as high. And so even regardless of if it was Trinity Hunt or whoever else, maybe the numbers wouldn't have made sense at the time. But when we met with Trinity, first of all, it's one of those things like, private equity sometimes has, it's like SEO, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, there's definitely, good actors and bad actors in the SEO space. And I imagine it's kind of the same in the private equity space. And so from our initial meeting with those folks over at Trinity Hunt and Herringbone Digital, it's just like, I had a great deal of respect for who they were as people. I'm a pretty good, judge of character. And so I, as is, my COO and my CFO. And so it just felt like they were good people. And then on top of that, what they were building, was really exciting. And some of the things that they started to share with us, and some of the people that they were recruiting, and the fact that, they are verticalizing in, not only legal, but other niches, that we could maybe take some of the stuff that we've learned at Hennessey Digital, maybe apply that to some of the other verticals. It just seemed like a great fit. And so that's why we took the relationship a little bit more serious, and things escalated a little bit faster.
And do you remember anything specifically, whether it was something that they said or a question that they answered that made you feel more convicted about the route they were going down? Or did it just match up with your thoughts on world domination?
Truthfully, everything that they were saying was, some of the stuff that, for years and years, I personally would have liked to build myself.
Like, what's an example?
Basically, getting real access to capital to potentially start to, consolidate, maybe, through acquisitions. Taking the same model, like, I wrote a book called Law Firm SEO, which is very successful. And it serves as a great lead magnet to bring in clients to Hennessey Digital. What if I were to take that same book and, write it for dentists or write it for plastic surgeons and really kind of go aggressive to market that way? And so, those were some of the things that I would have liked to do. And so I was sitting there thinking about this. It's like, they're already building kind of like the company that I envisioned building, myself. But unfortunately, I don't have access to that type of capital to kind of deploy to build it. And so I was looking at it as, it's either I join them or I compete with them. And so that was, a big part of the decision too.
And so in that vision for you, were you always the CEO, or were you going to have to find somebody to be a CEO? Because I think you and I had talked before that what gets you really excited is not necessarily operating a 20 or 30 or $50 million business, but other aspects of that. How did that factor into your thinking overall?
Yeah. I never really looked at myself as a good CEO, truthfully. I had more passion towards the SEO side. And I think that's why I was able to build a successful business, was because of, that's how people know me in the industry, right? Like I've got a pretty decent personal brand. And when you think of the Jason Hennessey personal brand, you don't think of Jason Hennessey, the CEO of Hennessey Digital. You think of Jason Hennessey like a really great SEO in the legal vertical, and even in just the SEO vertical, right? I've got a pretty big influence in the SEO community. I speak at international conferences and stuff like that too. And so I think sometimes when you just have that much passion, things start to work itself out. And I ended up getting a CEO coach to help me become a better CEO. And he was instrumental in taking us from 5 million to north of 20 million. And so, here I am now at 20 million, and I don't have the answers on what it's going to take to go from 20 to 100 million. And so, I am still the CEO of Hennessey Digital. I will be the CEO for the foreseeable future. But the beautiful thing now is that we have Raj, who's now kind of like my counterpart. He's the CEO of Herringbone Digital, and he brings, the experience, to take a business to 100+ million, and then there's also Daniel Street that's on the board too, who is the former CEO of Scorpion, one of our, biggest competitors, I guess, if you will. And so now having him as a mentor, and he and I are now on the board of Herringbone Digital, talk about getting like professional advice and insights that, most people would pay a lot of money for.
And so as that kind of came together or as it's going to come together, I know, and Raj spoke about this and how important it is to him to be able to rely on you. And is it fair to think of Herringbone and then maybe 3 legs to that stool currently: dental, legal, and medical? And will you be the leader or the president or whatever the terminology is of legal?
Yeah, I think there'll be home services too, I think, is another vertical that we'll probably kind of expand into. I think they'll definitely kind of build the legal vertical around about Hennessey, just because we've got a great reputation in the marketplace. And we probably would like to continue to expand on that. And so we're certainly, looking at other companies in the legal space right now that are very exciting conversations that we are having. And so it's going to be a fun journey, let's just say, over the next 12 months, as I get the honor and privilege of maybe even working together alongside some people that I've long respected in the market, and we're now wearing kind of like the same uniform. But I think it's too early to tell, exactly what the next, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months looks like. But personally, like, I am bought into what we're building. I'll be here for the foreseeable future. And I think I will just be doing things to continue to grow the asset. And the asset is Hennessey Digital, but the bigger asset is everything that encompasses under Herringbone Digital.
Yeah. And what Raj spoke about is using legal as the example that, as good as Hennessey is, there's missing pieces to what their overall offering is. Mm-hmm. So he talked about additional services, additional size statutes, I guess, if you will, in terms of serving large clients, medium, smaller clients.
Yep.
It's never quite that neat, cookie cutter, like they fit in nice boxes. Mm-hmm. How concerned are you about personality clashes or culture or, challenges that will come from trying to put those pieces together?
Yeah. I don't think I'm overly concerned. As you mentioned, Hennessey Digital is kind of set up to be more of like a premier, white glove kind of service. And so that's kind of what we built that company up. If we were to have taken on some of the smaller law firms, solo practitioners, for lower budgets, we probably could have had a bigger agency, but it would just be a different business model, right? And so we do get a lot of those leads that come in, and unfortunately, we don't always have a good place to place those leads. And so I think if we were to acquire another agency that is more set up to kind of service that type of client, it just is a win-win. And so that's why we're looking at, some other acquisitions in the industry that we can downsell to, also that we can bolt on services that, are adjacencies to some of the things that we don't offer at Hennessey Digital. And so, I think, and we're dealing with really highly intelligent people that, some of the smartest people in the industry, that are kind of helping to make some of these decisions. And it's a very strategic play there. So.
And and then I want to move on. You mentioned being on the board of Hennessey, of Herringbone, and that doesn't happen often. Was that an important component of the overall deal for you, or was it just a logical step that this is an important acquisition for us? We need Jason's input as we grow.
Truthfully, I think when they offered that, I think that was a sign that they were not just bought into acquiring Hennessey Digital for the sake of taking the EBITDA and then cutting some team members and making it more profitable. You know what I mean? That is a play that private equity, as you probably know, sometimes will often do, right? Where the founder is not going to stay, right? And so when they offer that to me, that at that point I knew that they were bought into not only the company that I built, but me and my perspective and my influence in the space. And so granted, I won't have control, but I will certainly have influence. And I think this group really values, some of the thoughts and tactics that I bring to the table in some of these board meetings.
And, you mentioned it, a couple of them, but what were your biggest concerns going into the process? Which ones did you have to work through and which ones never materialized?
Yeah. So candidly, this was probably the third or fourth, private equity group that we had met with, over the past, call it 2 years. And so some of them that we met with, going into it, we just knew that they probably weren't going to be a right fit, just because I don't think it would have been the best thing for our clients, right? And so selfishly, as a founder, somebody can sell a business, and if it's all about them and they're just going to cash out, make a lot of money, sometimes people do that. For me, I would have never done that. This had to be a perfect fit for my clients, my team, and then me third, truthfully, right?
In all due respect there, Jason, a lot of times when people want to make a match happen, people will exaggerate the truth or a little bit to give you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
How did you rationalize that? How did you get comfortable that they were really going to do what they have a reputation for doing and said that they would do?
Yeah, just doing some of my due diligence, speaking with people, interviewing, those that have already kind of done deals. And so kind of doing my own due diligence there, but then also, just through a lot of the questions that I asked. And it took us probably, I'm not sure if this is common or not, but it took us probably about 3 months of just negotiating the LOI, right? And so, and so, and the LOI sets the stage for, what would be next. Right. And so it was during that time that I was able to kind of see, is this really going to be what they say it's going to be? Because if it is, then they're willing to kind of put this in the terms of the LOI. And it seemed like we were kind of mutually aligned, the whole time, as we were kind of a give and an ask, and, and it just kind of worked well like that.
And one of the interesting things for founders in that process is the question of, when do I involve my team? How did you, because I think the fear always is, I don't want them to get distracted. I don't want them to get concerned if we're just having conversations. But for the people we're having conversations with, they need to see the talent pool that we have here.
Sure.
So how did you think about that, number one? And number two, not by name, but maybe by position, how did you roll that out to the team? Who did you include first?
Yeah. So that was kind of like a as need to know basis. And when I say that, it's not because I don't want anybody in the company to know. There's a very high likelihood when you start having these conversations that it never materializes, right? And so, even after an LOI is signed, right? For one reason or another. And so I didn't want this to be a distraction, to anybody that it didn't have to be a distraction, because we still have business to attain to, right? And so, basically, the people that I brought in initially, obviously, finances is a big part of a deal like this, and so our CFO was brought on. My COO and president was also instrumental in bringing him on. And then we also brought in my CTO. So most of my C-suite was involved. And then
they had done deals before, Jason, correct?
Yeah, that was a beauty. And I think part of the cliff notes on how I was able to get here, truthfully, is because my COO, my CFO, and my CTO worked together for about 10 years, at another company in a different industry. And they helped bring that to exit. And theirs was a little different. I think they sold to VCs, but they were definitely instrumental to that growth. And so when I was able to get my COO, he had such great influence and impact on the CFO that he was able to get her to agree to potentially come over. And then we eventually together recruited the CTO. And so it was like a package deal that, I certainly benefited from. Yeah.
And so you involved them. You mentioned the LOI. They were involved before the LOI, or it was right after the LOI?
So the COO and CFO were involved pre-LOI. And then we brought in CTO after the LOI was signed. And then there was a couple other instrumental team members that were also brought in for very specific needs during diligence.
And how nervous were you about sharing it with the entire team? And was your concern warranted or not?
I think you are a person of integrity and character, right? And I've always built that company, that way. I hold my personal reputation, regardless of if it's with clients or staff or whoever, in such a high regard that, when I delivered this message to my team and my leadership and even my clients, it comes from a place of being sincere, being radically honest, being radically transparent. And so, when I delivered it, I don't see why they would have ever thought that I was lying to them, that the reason why I decided to do this was, for the future growth of Hennessey Digital and getting access to more capital. Because, like, truthfully, Todd, our company, it's always been in bootstrap mode, right? And so when you're in bootstrap mode, my COO does a very good job of kind of keeping me like like in the lane, because otherwise I've got so many ideas that I want to bring to life. Unfortunately, our budget wasn't there to sustain bringing all my ideas to life, right? And so there's probably ideas that I could have brought to life years and years ago, just didn't have the capital to do it, right? And so, they basically only allowed me to put together 3 of my biggest ideas every year, right? And so I had to be very selective, right? And so now having access to real capital, now I can bring a lot more of my ideas to life.
And though in theory, those ideas will benefit your clients, get better results for your clients. Did they understand that and believe in that when you kind of told them what happened about the transaction?
Oh, yeah, 100%, because everybody knows that Jason Hennessey is a big idea guy, right? And so it's very apparent. I think sometimes people only want to meet with me for 10 or 15 minutes because some new idea is going to come up that, like all of a sudden we're like, all right, we're going in this direction now, right? And so I always like to say, Scott, my COO, is my no person. I think every entrepreneur needs a no person, right? And he doesn't even say no. He just says, that's a great idea, Jason, just not right now, right? And so, yeah, I think, the team realizes that. And like I said, I'm now like a pretty large investor, right, in Herringbone, right? And so I'm going to be around for the foreseeable future because we're just getting started with Herringbone, right? This is inning number 1. And so I'm really super excited at what the next 10 years looks like. Yeah.
Getting a little bit granular for a minute. As you went through due diligence, what was a bigger surprise, either because it was harder than you thought or easier than you thought based on, conceptions you had in your mind?
So this is my first time. I like to tell people that in the past 6 months, I got an MBA in mergers and acquisitions by living it.
Common theme. Yes.
Yeah. Because I had no, nothing before this to ever to set my expectations. So this was just all new to me. And so, once I signed the LOI, the diligence started, and that begins with, quality of earnings, which a lot of people, that's where people fear, is that the numbers aren't going to add up or your books are a mess, and so, my CFO, I'd put her up with CFOs of big companies. She's amazing. And so I knew
all that, right? And so I think you went into it with a great deal of confidence, right? You were pretty buttoned down generally, but doubly so on finance.
Yeah. So that's where a lot of people are kind of probably get more intimidated. Are our numbers going to actually be where we set, right? Because an LOI is based before they actually see a lot of that, right? And so the numbers can kind of shift a whole lot. So I was very confident that was going to pass with high flying colors. And we did, and then they do a very investigative background check on me. I knew I had nothing to hide there. So that was okay. Then there's other parts of the diligence that, you go through. Believe it or not, the thing that I didn't realize was going to take the longest was the reps and warrants. Because that's, I don't know, it turned into a 96-page document with, we need this and we need this report.
Can you describe what that is a little bit?
I think so. Reps and warrants is where, they just want to make sure that, everything is well documented, so that, if there's anything that kind of comes up later, that, there's just documentation for it, right? So they want to see all your contracts. They want to see all your vendor agreements. They want to see, any other thing that, that was a part of the business that you might not have thought of, right? But for whatever reason, it just kind of resurfaced and you had to kind of furnish that information, and it makes sense because if I was the buyer, right, I would want to have all of that insights as well going into that as well.
And
so
I think the two sides of that are, it forces disclosure.
Correct.
Right? Even for things you hadn't thought about in years and years.
Yeah.
But it also provides insurance for you.
Correct.
that one employee from 5 years ago, because people act a little bit differently when they hear, geez, private equity's involved now. Maybe we should go take another look at how we were terminated or what that
Sure.
contract said or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
So having disclosed whatever the history was means that you're protected from
That's right.
Right, from downside.
That's right. Yeah.
And so a good lawyer will force you through all of that. A good buyer just doesn't want surprises. So it's all helpful from that standpoint.
Correct. Yeah.
As you look back, being your first time through the process, and maybe communicating with listeners that are going to be first time sellers, what do you wish you would have known or maybe did a little bit differently a year in advance and then right as you were kind of starting a process?
Yeah. Well, I would definitely say that, if and when you are looking to potentially either exit or find a capital partner, get an investment, things like that. That is definitely a strategy, right? And it's a strategy that you probably want to take some time to consider because you start to run your business a little differently, during that period, right? The goal is to kind of increase profitability, right, for a period of time. And that kind of gets you, a number that, that you would probably be happy with at the end. So, for us, we weren't, like I said, we were only like 9 months into the journey of our strategy, right? And so, probably, in hindsight, maybe, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have went to so many conferences that year, you know what I mean? And spent a lot of money on marketing, so those are probably some of the things that, you might have done a little differently to kind of rise the EBITDA a little bit.
And now that you've gotten your MBA, do you look at Hennessey Digital differently? Because when you look outward, you're wonderful and shiny and you've got great customers, and you got all that kind of stuff. But when you look at it inwardly, which this process often, requires that people do, you start to see it how the outside world sees it without rose-colored glasses, but with analytical glasses and deep finance glasses and legal glasses.
Yeah.
Do you think and see it differently? And what are the biggest ways that you see it now?
Yeah, truthfully, I don't think it's a bad thing, to, have a third party come in and maybe kind of do a quality earnings analysis, even before you're going to sell, you know what I mean? Like, so, there might have been certain things that we would have done in preparation, maybe not so much on the quality earnings. That's just one example. But maybe just doing some of the diligence, like tax diligence, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of the diligence that, I think any business owner that might potentially sell, you can get out in front of that, right? So that when you are ready to sell, you already have, maybe an appraisal done. You've got, then exactly how much
you have employment contracts. You have
all of that. Yeah. All of that.
Just organized, right? Things you wouldn't need to do day to day.
It's all buttoned up because that creates a lot of potential issues where you have to kind of go back and forth. And now you're paying very expensive lawyers, to kind of negotiate that on your behalf. And it starts to get more expensive when, if you would have done that a year in advance, you could have probably been a little bit more buttoned up and made the process more smoother, I would say.
Moving on to now that we're looking forward, right? That you're looking forward. How do you think your role will change? What do you want to change in your role as as you add on these other pieces and grow the business?
Yeah. Truthfully, what I'm really excited by is not so much, from the Hennessey side, certainly everything that I talked about, the use, like I just got back from Stanford. I did an executive MBA program there. And so like, I don't do that because I have to do that. It's not like my college is going to earn me more money. You know what I mean? Like it will though, in the long term, because education is so powerful. Right. And so like everything at Stanford is all AI and large learning models and, all of that. And so, I go there to get inspired, to come back and to, bring more innovation, to Hennessey Digital, but then also bring more innovation to Herringbone Digital, right? So, just product development, I think will be an instrumental part of my role. And then also acquisitions too, because I definitely have a very large network of other agency owners. I coach other agency owners as well. And so I think that's also going to be a big part of what I bring to growing the asset with Herringbone is, helping to maybe bring in more agencies into the pipeline that we could potentially add on to the portfolio.
So to wrap us up, this is middle of 25.
Mm-hmm.
If I can convince you to come back on at the end of 26, and you're looking back over the first 18 months.
Yeah.
What would it take for you to come back and say, man, we've had a great 18 months out of the gate?
Sure. So I would definitely say, Hennessey Digital is still kind of in hyper growth mode, right? So we're still growing. Our quality of product continues to get better. We would have probably brought on a couple other companies within the legal vertical that also have pretty decent names in the space that are now counterparts of Hennessey. And potentially, now we're actually leveraging a lot of the things that we've done at Hennessey Digital to then add on to some of the other agencies, because we've invested a lot in technology to build an agency and make it more efficient. Taking some of those resources and start to basically make some of the other agencies that we acquire more efficient, right? And vice versa, learning from some of the other agencies that we acquire, where we can maybe learn and add on some of the things that they do well, right? To make our client experience better, I'd say.
Well, then we'll need to get you back on here so that we can measure that in 18 months. So hopefully I can convince you to do that. It was great to have you share as openly and honestly as you have, Jason. So thank you for that. It's great to hear the seller and the buyer both kind of share their perspectives. And I think for listeners that catch both episodes, you'll see that there's a real match of expectation from each side. So it's nice when a plan comes together and when the match is as strong as it is. Hopefully we'll follow along and watch other acquisitions happen along the way. And I thank you for spending time. All your contact information, if people want to try to track you down, you can find Jason on LinkedIn, but they'll all be on the show notes at secondbitepodcast.com. So you can find it there. You can find him at Hennessey Digital. You can find him at Herringbone. Not a difficult guy to find online. So Jason, thank you for participating. Thanks to our sponsors at Fiscal Advocate. And best of luck over the next 18 months till we have you back.
Thank you so much, Todd. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.